Hey everyone, thank you for bearing with us as we are getting the Zoom ready for you guys. We are officially live now and recording. If any of your friends or family members or colleagues weren't able to tune in today, the good news is we are recording, and this will be posted on Silence the Shame's website as well as YouTube page. Please make sure if you're just going to mute your microphone. Everyone, please mute your microphone. Okay. All right. So my name is Shanti Das. I am the founder and executive director of Silence the Shame, which is a nonprofit here in Atlanta, Georgia. And we exist to empower and educate communities around mental health and wellness. This is, wow, I don't even really know where to start. I'm just grateful that God has given us all the strength to even be on this webinar today. This has been an extremely tough time for the world, for the nation, for everyone, but particularly for Black people. We watched as we laid George Floyd to rest earlier in his hometown of Houston, Texas. And we've watched so many of our young people. Okay. Mute your microphones, please. And we watched as our young people got out to fight for justice this week. But one thing that rang true is every time I talk to a friend or family member or colleague, everyone just felt emotionally drained. People that had probably never even dealt with anxiety or depression, and we were already in a pandemic, right? So we've heard people say we're in a pandemic within a pandemic, and this certainly has been a lot for us all to process. And I just thought, I know this came together quickly, but I thought it was really important for us to get on and kind of share and talk about what we're going through. So first, I would like to just thank our panelists, and we're going to have our panelists tell a little bit about themselves. First, I would like to start with a dear friend, Dr. Spirit. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? And we truly appreciate you for being on with us this evening.
I appreciate it too, and please forgive the close because I just got finished seeing my last client, so I hadn't even switched over today. Let's see, I said client, so I am a licensed professional counselor, a national certified counselor, a doctor of psychology, and as I tell folks, all just fancy ways of just saying that I'm a mental health professional. And as we kind of get into this conversation, what I really want to talk about today is the ways that we are impacted in terms of not only our mental health functioning, but as we like to say, that the body always keeps the score. So, it's even what your mind won't allow you to focus on, some of the ways that you may see those in the behaviors of your friends, your families, and your loved ones today.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your knowledge and your expertise, and certainly looking forward to all that you have to share this evening. Next, I would like to introduce a good friend as well and colleague, Dr. Sultan Simms, who actually has participated in the past with other Silence the Shame events. So thank you and welcome back to Silence the Shame, Dr. Simms. Tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me again, Shanti, to participate. I am a psychiatrist, been in practice for about 15 years. Was in private practice for about 10 years, working in community mental health. Was a medical director at a community mental health center. Past 5 years or so, I've been a medical director in the managed care world, working for a big corporation now, which is kind of relevant to some of the activity I've been engaged in lately. So, and also very involved in organized medicine. I'm the immediate past president, just finished my term as president for the Georgia chapter of the American Psychiatric Association. The name of our chapter is the Georgia Psychiatric Physician Association. So I'm always happy to get out in the community and work with folks like Shanti and try to spread the word about the importance of taking care of our mental health.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you do as well. Last but not least, and again, I mentioned, we're going to have another panelist joining. I would like to welcome platinum selling recording artist, producer, and activist Royce 5'9". I had the great pleasure of meeting for the first time, I think, just this past fall when he released his new album. And I'm so honored that he was able to join us this evening. So Royce, welcome. Thank you, young man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those kind words. That's the first time I've ever been called an activist. I like it.
I mean, because you've been out really on the front lines, speaking up for your community, and I think you've been doing this work, whether you realize it or not, for many years. So just thank you for your voice.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate being appreciated, and I mean, I just been around for a minute. As you know, I'm also an alcoholic. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I have a lot of different reasons to really care about the culture. I've been through a lot in the music business, but I've been through a lot as an individual, and I benefited a lot just by going to therapy. And I was one of those people who kind of viewed therapy as kind of like taboo, something that I didn't even want to consider being a part of. And I benefited from it so much from just a personal standpoint, and the way that I communicate and the way that I just kind of exist in my own skin. And usually when you go through something like that, when you yourself go through it, you can kind of view the disconnects that you see in the community, and the ways that it can benefit the communities as well. So I'm always honored to be a part of these types of seminars and discussions.
Certainly appreciate you. And Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, like I mentioned, is going to be joining us. He was finishing up some other work, and he'll be getting on shortly after 7:30. Nick Cannon was also supposed to join us, but he got called into another interview for work. So he may or may not jump on, but I am so honored, and you guys will get a wealth of information tonight. So let's jump right into it. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Spirit. As we talked about earlier, this has just been a heavy week for so many of us, this pandemic within a pandemic. And I know it has affected Black families quite differently. And that's no disrespect to anybody else, but seeing the death of George Floyd, and watching Black mothers and Black fathers have to have these uncomfortable conversations with their children, and then dealing with a lot of their own trauma, I think, that they may have been experiencing or have experienced, in the past. It was just a lot to kind of unpack at one time. Can you just talk about how this has just been incredibly overwhelming and how it's impacting so many of our communities?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because when we talk about the idea of this being a pandemic within a pandemic, we have to be real and say that the racism was the original pandemic. And it's not something that we just started dealing with.
That's right.
This is a tipping point yet again. And we've had many throughout our history. So this is something that is about reckoning for other groups more so than it is us. As Black people, we've been dealing with the sting and the trauma of racism since we arrived on this continent, if you will.
1619.
Well, and I won't, I will say since colonialism, because we were here long before the colonists were, and our experiences here looked much different. But unfortunately, we are at a place where now we have reached a tipping point where we are seeing ourselves traumatized again and again and again. And in addition to trying to deal with all of the other daily stressors, we're also now dealing with all of this pain being brought up and brought out in new ways, on top of the COVID pandemic, on top of many of us who are essential workers still trying to go to work and put on a brave face or just to focus, on top of now having to be teachers to our children that we're homeschooling, cooks 3 times a day because we can't go out to the restaurants, the launderers because we can't go to the cleaners. So it has just become stress on top of stress on top of stress. And many of us are doing the very best that we can in order just to function, which has caused us to lose parts of ourselves. Because for many folks, they say, you know what, if I actually had to feel all of this, if I actually had to take all this in, I probably wouldn't even be able to cry because I'm so afraid that I wouldn't be able to stop. I probably can't really feel because I'm so angry, I would probably want to hurt someone. And so a lot of us are doing the best that we can to operate in survival mode at this point.
I mean, I feel like crying right now. I've had so many people who just were at a loss for words. I mean, it is completely overwhelming. Royce, how did everything affect you when you first saw what happened with George Floyd, and how did you process through any of this?
I'm for lack of a better term, I know there's a way better term, but I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. I became a little bit numb quite some time ago, so I think, to me, from where I'm sitting, I feel like the outrage that we're seeing, and people kind of like yelling for the rights, for equal rights. I think they caught us at a time where everybody's kind of sitting in front of their computer and everybody's locked down, and they're kind of forced to look at America for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And like this whole situation, like it forces people to kind of look for a brighter side, like a silver lining in this. And for me, just looking at it optimistically, it gives us an opportunity to begin to do things where we're thinking as a collective. It certainly opened up my eyes to some of the concerns of the Black LGBTQ community, and as it pertains to their relationship with us in hip hop. I had a hard time making the connection or understanding some of their concerns previously. I think we just either fear or we just kind of go away from things that we don't understand. And it's not something that I've ever confronted or we've ever addressed in any form that I've been a part of. And so I just didn't recognize it as problematic. So I've said things in records that may have hurt some people, and like creatively, creative intent is everything to me. So if that's not my intention to hit that target that way, and it's making somebody feel in a way that I didn't intend, then I feel like I've missed my target. So this was one of those situations where it was kind of forcing me to look at that. And then I was on a Zoom call with Janelle Monáe like recently, and she spoke about violence against gay Black women that gets swept under the rug, violence against Black trans men, Black trans women. A lot of these things, I just feel like needs to start getting weaved into the narrative somehow. And I think this is a good opportunity just for us as a culture and as a community to just start focusing on the things that are kind of like harmful to our community, and just kind of collectively taking the steps to kind of start trying to rectify them a little bit. So I think that's kind of like the silver lining that I'm looking at when I see it. But just in terms of each murder, they're all traumatic to me, and I'm to the point where I'm just like, I'm damn near PTSD from that. I'm already post-traumatic slave disorder. Now I'm PTSD from everything that is systematic in this country. Mm-hmm. And I just see so many disconnects. I see us challenging each other at the wrong times, speaking out against things that are against things at the wrong time. I just feel like we have to somehow figure out how to start doing things as a collective and start looking for a solution. Because I would hate for us to get to a point where we just seem like we're yelling. I would love to, I think we're to a point where we have the whole world's attention. So I think it's time now to start shaping a particular narrative, and so they know what we're saying. And, us start placing attention on our communities without being made to feel like we're doing something wrong when we do that. Absolutely. By either our white contemporaries or just, the business in general, whoever the powers that be are. I mean, artists need to be more fearless, and people need to be more cognizant of the power of having a platform and be more responsible. And, and we all got to do our part.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the Black trans community too, because there's been a lot of, violence within that community, whether it's been from police or within our own community. So that's definitely something that Silence the Shame is going to focus on more as well in the future. Dr. Simms, can you talk about, first of all, let me just say June is PTSD Awareness Month, for those of you that don't know that. And that's why I thought this topic was also very important this month, and considering everything that's going on. Can someone get PTSD from racial trauma? Or is this something that we've been experiencing, like Royce said, post-traumatic slave disorder for many years?
You know, my response to that is, you know, trauma is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And someone can develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder from any type of trauma. And so racial trauma is something that we've been dealing with for a long, long time. There's a movement amongst a number of mental health professionals to include racism as a disease, to really recognize racial trauma in the whole spectrum of disorders. So the short answer to that is yes. I know one thing I want to get across to people. It's good. There's a lot of power in sharing our experiences. We all need to understand that not everyone has to respond the same way to a particular issue. I'm kind of like Royce in that I'm kind of numb to what has been happening. You know, when I watched George Floyd being murdered on TV, that was not the first time that I've seen that. That was not the first time that I've seen images of that. That wasn't even the first time recently that I feel like I've seen that. I feel like we've been inundated with these images over the years. And so we all have to kind of know ourselves and try to understand how we process this type of information and these experiences. And I want people to feel comfortable that there's no wrong way. You know, I might be numb, or a big thing that I've been spending a lot of energy on is really warning people about how they consume these images and consume the news. It can be really traumatic to sit there and watch someone be murdered on TV over and over on CNN and this 24-hour news cycle. So, you know, we have to protect ourselves. It's okay. Some people may want to really be on top of everything that's going on and watch the news for hours every day. That's okay. If you can deal with that and you don't feel anger, rage, feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, sadness, if you don't want to cry or lash out, then okay. But if you're starting to feel those things, and I start to feel those emotions pretty quickly. So I have to step back. I have to limit and be mindful of how I consume the news. So, you know, there's no right way. There's no wrong way. Yes, these type of experiences play out in different ways. You might find that you're starting to have some trouble sleeping. You're avoiding certain situations. You're hyper vigilant. You're on edge. You're looking around to see if the police are there. You're nervous when you see a police car drive by. These are some of those clinical symptoms that can really start to develop. And so that can happen with any type of trauma. We have to be mindful of that. We have to do what, you know, we can do and take control of our behavior, our choices, and really protect our mental health. You know, I've been pushing, it's something that I've been dealing with at work, at home. You know, I had to bring my wife and my 3 kids, and you know, my wife likes to watch the news in the evening. I don't. After a full day of work and watching, consuming news online and watching videos online and reading articles. You know, I don't want to see the news necessarily if it's the same things playing over and over. So I had to bring everybody together and we had to kind of come up with a deal. You know, mommy wants to watch the news this time. I talked to my kids about how much they're consuming it. They let me know that they have to check out sometimes because it's too much. So I've been just spending a lot of time on that. That's just something that I hope we continue to have people aware of the importance of protecting your own mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Simms. And I'm just looking at some of the comments. Drea says, I haven't watched it, I just can't. Makita says the photo of it on its own is traumatic enough. Yeah. Dr. Spear, do you want to add?
And let me just quickly add that, you know, I'm careful when I tell people to kind of limit what they're exposed to, in that I don't want that to be taken as to not be aware or to not be. You have to figure out the way to do that, but at the same time protecting yourself and limiting certain things.
Like for me, I've been trying to just read news stories more as opposed to watching the videos when I'm on social media. Dr. Spirit, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say we have to be careful, especially as Black people. Unfortunately, the media in a lot of ways has this almost like fetishizes in a lot of ways our abuse, our murders, our death, the trauma that we face. And so I have told people, you know, as a loving reminder that you don't have to watch the murder, the beating, the torture, the oppression, the abuse of other human beings in order to fight for justice, for dignity, for equality, for the right to exist. You can look away, you can scroll past and still be an ally, still be an activist. You do not have to expose yourselves to that. And I have actually taken a lot of my colleagues to task as a person in media behind the scenes. I've reached out to some of the major organizations to say, as organizations of color, shouldn't you be fighting for them not to re-traumatize us over and over? You see white folks in the news when they have murders or violent deaths, and their faces will be blurred out, their bodies will be blurred out. They will stop the
But they
footage
ain't
right
blurred
at the
out
moment.
George yet.
Right, but with us, they'll show it over and over and over. They'll hype it up, they'll clip it up. And that has been used as propaganda for us for many, many years in this country, because the message that it sends, one, is you're not valuable. Two, that we're going to watch this in order to cause reaction, that we're going to use this for ratings, that we're going to do all kind of stuff with this. But also it sends a very clear message in order to instill fear in you, in order to provoke anxiety, in order to control your behavior, and also to control the behavior of future generations, because then your children are exposed to that. Your children are exposed to how you're responding in the household, right? And so as we talk about racism, as we talk about race-based trauma, and I hope that in future DSMs, the DSM-6 or by 7 at the very least, that we will see race-based trauma as a real clinical diagnosis.
What you just said.
I'm sorry, the DSM is what clinicians use that are universally recognized diagnoses or mental health issues. And so it talks about and breaks down as a way of us, a standardized way of us diagnosing individuals. It's kind of like our therapist Bible. But I think that it's important for us to recognize, and many cities across the country are already declaring racism a public health crisis. I hope, and I'm still, again, behind the scenes, trying to talk to legislators, trying to talk to senators, trying to talk to local politicians about the need to be able to bring national attention to this. Because if we do not deal with the issue of racism, what we will have is this ongoing over and over and over re-traumatization, and we have to do something about our people. We are no longer to a point where we can look for other people to take care of us. We have to begin to recognize that we are deteriorating and look for ways to take care of ourselves.
Thank you so much. Amen. And we've got to take our politicians to task, right?
Absolutely. We have to take everybody to task.
We're in an election year. So Dr. Spirit, Dr. Simms, we're going to get together, because I would love for Silence the Shame to work with both of your organizations to come up with some language where we can create the social media campaign as we do head into November, so that these people that we're going to be voting for, right, we're not going to hold the vote hostage, but we are going to make sure that they understand, you know, what we need to do from a mental health perspective, right? And what we need to do in terms of rechanging these laws and making sure that, you know, you guys get what you need as clinicians. So I'm here for it. And we're going to work with you guys to make sure that the right messaging gets out to the everyday person, and especially in our community. Royce, I want to go back to you. It's something that's interesting that I didn't even know about. You know, for those of you that don't know, Royce is born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. And I read about the race riots of 1943. Had no idea. And I'm going to read a little bit of what I read. The riots were deeply rooted in racism, poor living conditions, and unequal access to goods and services. And of course, the KKK was extremely visible then. 9 whites and 25 African Americans were killed in the riots of 1943. No white individuals were killed by police, whereas 17 African Americans died at the hands of the police. 700 people were reportedly injured, and the damages amounted to like $2 million. Now, I know as a people, we are not new to violence from police, and certainly you being in Detroit, can you share about the thoughts around the traumatic events, you know, that we experience as Black people in terms of dealing with the police in Detroit?
You know, right now, strangely enough, right now, like in the city, we got Chief Craig, who's He's a chief of police in Detroit, and he's a young black guy. He's extremely cool and extremely tuned in. And this is the first time that, just as a citizen, that I've had a relationship with a police officer that I can call, I guess, productive, maybe. You know, like, and I think that's important when you have people of any sort of influence, to have some sort of relationship or some sort of connection with the law enforcement, because a lot of times we could be like the bridge between the actual communities and the powers that be, if you will. So yeah, we got a really good relationship, and there's a few other people that they have a good relationship with. So we were able to do like protests here that were pretty contained, you know. There was a few moments where a few people tried to get out of hand, and there were a few people that were arrested, but most of the people that got arrested were people from out of state. You know, like it was, I think the first night there were like 9 people who got arrested, and all of them were from out of state.
What about growing up when you were younger, just being a young kid on the block? What was the relationship like with you guys and the police back then?
Yeah, growing up as a young kid, that was completely different. I've never had, there's not a moment that I could think of as far back as I care to remember where I actually felt protected by the police. I never viewed them as like public officials who were there to keep me safe. I've always viewed them as like an authoritative force. You know, like I just always associated them with being like disciplined in some sort of way. And whenever I seen a police officer, I just thought about not wanting to go to jail, you know? So and I don't know if it was because of anything that they were doing. I don't know if it was because of the conditions, but just speaking from my own personal experiences in terms of how I viewed them, that's how I've always viewed police, all the way up until I stopped drinking, which was about 8 years ago. You know,
I think that's how, and I know, and so thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off on that, but to your point, Royce, we've been conditioned, right, as a people to fear the police. For the most part, there's never been any kind of real great relationships with cops, but it's how they want us to think. They want to lead with fear so that they can control us.
Shanti, can I jump in here? And I want to say, you know, part of this, I think that it's important for us to contextualize the relationship with the police. And, you know, for me, I always have to give the preface that I've come out of a home of law enforcement officers. Both my mother and father were in law enforcement. My grandmother was too. But with that being said, we also have to understand the history, and we have to be real about it. And law enforcement came in this country out of slave patrols, okay? Right. So if we understand the history that law enforcement or police actually came out of being able to capture slaves who were attempting to flee from their plantation masters' homes. So they were never there for us. They were never there to protect and serve us. We were property, and they were put in place in order to be able to save the property of the slave master, which is why even now when we look and people are responding not to our bodies being killed, but to the property, right? People are still talking about the looting and the rioting and why they can't support our fight to exist and not be terrorized, because, you know, this whole idea that we somehow have to speak to this idea that we need to beg you for the pleading, for you to understand our right to exist without being terrorized. So we have to understand the history. And when we look at community policing, when we look at law enforcement agencies who are really looking to protect and serve, we have to understand that that's a very progressive movement. That is something where it didn't exist. So as we're talking about defunding the police in order to move those monies to other places, we really have to understand that this is progression, and that the law enforcement system was never set up in order to protect and serve. It was always set up to enforce and make sure that they kept us in a position where we were beneath where they were.
Absolutely. Great point. Great point. Do you want to add anything, Dr. Simms?
You know, as I was listening, I've been in similar conversations, and I think it's important to have the history. I think it's important to talk about all of this content. I was really interested in hoping that folks walk away with, knowing your legislators. I tend to really emphasize kind of what can we do now, and what can we do moving forward. You need to know the entirety of the issue, but what can we do moving forward? I mean, does everybody know who their state representative is? Does everyone know who their state senator is? Does everybody know who their district attorney is? Do you know how to contact that person? Do you know how to bring issues to your representatives who are sent there to represent you? Have you been to the Capitol? There are all types of events going on at state capitals throughout the year. Mental Health Day. I've been down to the Capitol many times. And so, and there are a lot of smart people working on these issues. Who can you partner with that kind of is in your wheelhouse? I think some of us are going to go out and be in the protests. Some of us aren't. Some of us are going to put together discussions like this. Some of us are going to work in corporate settings to push for change, or call your media contacts and try to get them to stop re-traumatizing us. I've been working in a corporate setting to make sure we're acknowledging the trauma that's happening, that we're acknowledging what our Black employees are having to deal with every day, and to ensure that there are supports for those Black employees and everyone who's impacted. There are so many different aspects to this. So I hope folks are thinking, maybe even picking and choosing. That's the way that I want to help. I think I'm good at that. I may have a strong voice. I may want to get out and rally. I'll do that. Well, maybe I don't have a strong voice and I don't want to be out front. I'll find this other way that I can support the movement. So that's what I'm thinking about as we're having this conversation. And I hope that's what, people can kind of take away, and reach for mentors, reach for people in your community who are active. Ask them what they're doing, how they're doing it. And, we love that. Those of us who have had some success or who are out and have these connections, we love when people come to us and say, how can I help? What can I do? Can I work with you? And so I hope that's a takeaway from this conversation.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
While I got these two brilliant people.
Yes.
What do you guys think about what they're trying to do to the like restructuring the whole, like totally restructuring things from the police perspective in Minneapolis? Like, is there any downside to that you see?
Well, I will say for me, since I'm not an expert in this area, what I have started to do is, and I think I actually asked on my social media the other day, who are the people that we should be following that are the experts in criminal justice reform, who are the experts in social reform? And I think that first and foremost, we need to know that the language is important, right? Because when they started talking about defund the police, people automatically went to polar opposite sides, believing that defund the police meant abolish the police and dismantle them. But what they're really talking about is not necessarily doing away with law enforcement. They're talking about taking some of the money that the police force gets and reapportioning that money, so that instead of all of that money going to law enforcement officers so that they can invest in tanks and military grade weapons and all of these things, they're talking about, let's put that money in places and spaces where it makes law enforcement less necessary, right? Because we already have defunded police stations in many of the suburbs around America, right? In a lot of the wealthy places, they don't police, and you don't see police in those communities like how you see them in places where we have less education, less opportunities, less employment, less businesses. So when they're talking about defunding the police, what they're talking about is moving that money to other places, so then the need to have law enforcement there becomes less. And I see that as benefits, but I recognize that with all things, there are pluses and minuses. So I think that it's a good opportunity for us to find out who the experts are that represent us, for us to figure out ways to amplify their voices, for us to figure out ways for them to educate us, and make sure that we are doing our parts to know where our lanes are and where it's time for us to step back and listen. And so I just invite anybody who is an expert in that place to really be able to step up and educate us, but also for us to know that we can't be experts in all places. So we have to be careful about how we steer and where our lane is when we're driving.
And so my response to that would be, first, I don't know what it means. So Dr. Spirit was, kind of giving some examples of what it could mean. And we all know we don't want it to mean there's no law enforcement. That would be a no. That's what it sounds like. That's what the headline sounds like. Defund the police, take the money away, and then there's no police. And then there's, anarchy. So I know it doesn't mean that, but
it means demilitarize the police. That's what it means.
It does mean, but what it really brings up for me is the idea, and there's a similar parallel in medicine. It's very difficult to get a group of people to police themselves, to fix the problems, because the first inclination is to protect each other. A lot of what we see with the police and their tactics, things aren't fixed because their first responsibility seems, in their mind, to protect their brethren. And so rather than report that excessive use of force or that abuse of power, they write these reports where they make up stories about what actually happened. I think video is really changing the game and helping us to bring us where we are. And it's similar in medicine. If, as a physician, we physicians feel like we should be making all of the decisions in medicine. We feel like we're trained and went to school all the years and blah, blah, blah. But there's value in having non-physicians, non-medical people, the community, the people we serve, be involved in the process of deciding what is good medicine. Yes, we're experts as physicians, so we should have a big voice, but we shouldn't be the only voice. And I think similarly, I'm not in law enforcement. A police officer knows more than me about what it is to do police work, but the police officer is also there to serve the community. So the community should have a role in the policies and the procedures and the tactics. And I think, to me, you have to kind of break it down before you can kind of build it back up. So that's what I hear when I hear defund the police. To me, I'm feeling like it's almost a rebranding. We're going to break it down, maybe rebrand it, call it a security force. This is going to allow us to not have to be beholden to the unions, and we can recreate the policies and procedures. I'm making some of that stuff up. I don't know, but that's what I think.
And if I could, go ahead, Shanti. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask a quick question from our panel around generational trauma. The question is, will you all unpack the concept of intergenerational trauma, its channels for transmission, and coping strategies to break the cycle in terms of how people process through trauma? I just thought that was a really important.
Well, I think that's a great one. Okay, so intergenerational trauma, as I explain it, and everybody understands it differently, but when I'm working with my clients personally, what I talk about is the trauma that's passed down. We all have our own trauma as human beings. There's no way that we can't be exactly where we are at this point in our lives without have experiencing our own set of traumas that have hurt us, disappointed us, wounded us, angered us, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of us are just, we think about all the times that we should have not even been on this planet anymore. We should be dead from all of the things that either we experienced or we have caused upon ourselves. So we have our own trauma. But if we go back even further, we have trauma that comes from our childhood by our parents raising us, who had their own unresolved trauma, and their parents had theirs. And so intergenerational trauma is trauma that gets passed down either through environment or through genetics. And that goes from generation to generation to generation. And so when we talk about ways that gets passed down, sometimes that can be through unhealthy coping strategies that our families use in order to be able to, we do the wrong things for the right reason. So say, for example, I may be a parent who is under an extreme amount of stress, and I don't necessarily come home and beat my wife or beat my children, but I may be what some consider a social alcoholic. Oh, they would drink every day, but they could hold their drink and still hold a job. Or we look at unhealthy ways of being able to cope, and those things get passed down. And I often tell parents, they'll say, well, I hope that my children are better than me. And I have to explain to them why they will likely grow up to be either exactly who they are or swing all the way to the other unhealthy side to say, I'll never be like that person, because the traumas and the ways that we look to cope, our children learn to do as we do. Even though we say, do as I say, not as I do, our children learn to become exactly who we are, or the complete opposites in response to not liking the way that we were. So it's all of those unhealthy patterns that get passed down generation after generation. And we have to be real about the role that supremacy has played in that. We have to be real about the role that racism has played in that, and that as Black people, that is integrated into every part of our society, every part of who we are. That is the systemic racism, that exists. So even when we talk about dealing in the medical community, for example, we have to deal with the mistrust that comes even with us as Black people interfacing with the medical community, understanding that that got passed down and that was not something that was a delusion or a paranoia for us. There were, you know, from the Tuskegee Airmen, but going all the way back to J. Marion Sims, who you know, did the father of gynecology, who performed medical procedures on Black female slaves without using anesthesia. These things are very real. And so racism exists in every fabric of our being. And we are constantly having to rage against the machine just to simply survive, even in the places and spaces that should be helping us and allowing us to thrive.
Thank you. Dr. Simms?
I would just add to that, you know, it makes me think of a quote, which is, you know, I was a history major back in college, and a people that does not understand its history is doomed to repeat it. That's really what we're talking about. And so the first step is understanding the history, understanding this intergenerational trauma, where it comes from, its origins, how it's passed down. But some of us stop there. And I would like for us to take that next step, because that's where the real work comes in. All right, now I understand why maybe I think this way, or maybe I feel this way. Now I maybe can see how that is having an adverse impact on my life and my ability to function and my ability to succeed. Now what do I do? What steps can I take? What can I do to change myself, my family, and the greater community? And it's hard. It takes work. It's tough. That's why Dr. Spirit probably has long days working with patients, unpacking some of this. It's hard work on both sides, on the therapist side and on the patient side. So don't just stop and feel satisfied that you understand the history and the origin of things. That's a key. Because if you don't understand, you're just going to keep perpetuating those same cycles. But now what? I'm a big now what guy. So now what? What can I do moving forward? And that's where we have to put a lot of our focus.
Thank you. Thank you. I want you guys to continue to use the chat section as we, you know, start getting into Q&A soon. We're also waiting for Dr. Warnock, who's going to be joining us momentarily. Gosh, I just, you know, it's so much on my mind right now. And sometimes I don't even know really where to start or like how to process through a lot of this. Because I think on top of everything that we've been dealing with, you know, so many of us are grieving the loss of people that we don't know. Like, oh, here he is. All right, everybody, let's welcome Dr. Raphael G. Warnock.
Hello, everybody.
Ebenezer, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How's everybody?
We are hanging in here, Pastor. We have Dr. Spirit, who is an incredible clinician and therapist in the Atlanta area. Dr. Sultan Simms, who is a phenomenal Black psychiatrist. And we have rapper and activist Royce 5'9".
Wonderful, wonderful.
We were just talking about generational trauma, and you came in right on cue.
Well, you left out the most important luminary on the call, Shanti Das. That's why I'm here, because Shanti Das is on the call. And it's good to always to be with you. Good to see you, Shanti.
Same here. Thank you.
And
thank you for your leadership.
You.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. So let me ask you a question, Dr. Warnock. Can you talk about how racial trauma has been affecting our community for hundreds of years going back to slavery? Because we were just talking about like post-traumatic slave disorder, and you know, June is PTSD Awareness Month, and how a lot of our families, you know, we've never really unpacked a lot of this generational trauma. I mean, what is your perspective on that as a community?
Well, again, thank you so much. I'm grateful to be able to be a part of the conversation. I would have gotten on earlier, but
All right, I'm back.
Nicole, can you please mute your phone? Thank you. Sorry about that.
I have a standing conversation on Zoom with my congregation every Tuesday night at 7 as we're wrestling and through this very difficult and traumatic period. But you're right, we've been dealing with pandemics, if you will, for a long time. And over the last few weeks, we've been focused, rightly so, on COVID-19. And here is a virus that impacts everybody, but disproportionately impacts people of African descent, because it brings into sharp focus, it exacerbates actually long-standing trauma, disparities in access to healthcare, economic disparities.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing the impact of that. About 80% of the hospitalizations for COVID-19 in Georgia are Black people. We're 80% of the hospitalizations. So the virus itself, it doesn't discriminate, but it chases down certain comorbidities that we have, hypertension, all of these things related to racism and stress in many instances. Mm-hmm. Food deserts, a whole range of interlocking systems, right, that marginalize Black people and people of color. So we've been dealing with COVID-19, and we've been dealing with what I called 2 Sundays ago in the sermon, COVID-16-19. That is the trauma that began when the first Africans arrived on these shores of Jamestown, Virginia. I know the story is more complicated than that, it always is.
Right.
But it's an important marker. And we've been dealing with that virus, the virus of racism, for the entire time that we've been here. And we thought, or at least some people thought, that the virus had been beaten back in the bloody conflict of the Civil War. And for a moment, it seemed like that actually could happen. It seemed like it did, that was real. We call that little period Reconstruction. Lasted for just a few years. And there was a glimmer of hope during those few short years after the war. We weren't left with much, but it was during that time that, for example, you saw Black men at least serving in the Congress. And you saw Hiram Revels, the first Black United States Senator elected. Actually, they weren't elected then. He was appointed by the Mississippi House of Representatives. Hiram Revels, first Black United States Senator during this period of Reconstruction. He was a preacher, and he became a senator. Shameless plug, right? I'm running, y'all, for U.S. Senator. And it seemed like we'd beat the virus back, but then it came back with a vengeance in something called Jim Crow segregation. And which Douglas Blackman rightly characterizes as slavery by another name. The re-enslavement of African-American people through the middle of the 20th century. And then you saw the activation of the 13th Amendment that's got that little loophole that's created this problem, right? That you can't have slavery except for, right, criminal offense. And that's what's created this loophole through which we now get the new Jim Crow. We thought that the civil rights movement perhaps had inoculated us against the virus, but it mutated in what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. And so all of us are not incarcerated, but all of us are impacted by this incarceration system where in the land of in America, we warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners. Think about that. The United States of America is 5% of the world. We warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners.
Mm.
For about 40 years, our prison construction and all of that went up regardless of crime rates, because it had nothing to do with crime rates. It had to do with money, politicians playing into the politics of fear so that they could get to one higher office, to another higher office, to another higher office, by stoking racial resentments, fears of Black bodies and what they might represent. And so, yes, we have lived through all of that trauma: slavery, Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow. And because Black people keep pushing, sometimes folk act like we don't hurt. We act like we don't hurt. And there are all kinds of messages we receive as Black men that just keep moving. We don't cry, suck it up and keep going. And there's a way in which we've had to do that. And so that's why I'm grateful for forums that you create that allow us to have some space to be honest about trauma. The trauma that everybody experiences, the trauma that has to do with just being human, but then the trauma that has to do with being Black. And then, you know, faith has played a key role in that. You see it. And, Black people deal with grief. You ain't been to a funeral till you've been to a Black funeral. There's a kind of drama and pathos and pain and expression. You hear it in our music and the spirituals. You hear it in the blues, not just spirituals, but the blues and everything that comes from the blues. You know, it's a kind of catharsis. You feel it in Black preaching. I say to my white colleagues sometimes, y'all get away with murder. You just get up there and deliver that little essay every Sunday morning. We got the Black preacher, we got to bring it with content, and you got to pour your whole body into it. It's a lived, embodied experience that brings all Black joy, grief, all of that together. So it plays out in our faith. And one of the things finally that I try to push back against as a faith leader is our faith ought to help us to be honest about what we're struggling with. And sometimes what we're calling faith is not really faith, it's denial masquerading as faith. So I'm a person of faith. I believe that God is able, that God is with me. I believe all of that. I'm empowered by my walk with God, the one who walks with me. But sometimes we come up with all these little cliches in church that just become a way of covering up the real trauma. And the issues never get resolved. We shouldn't confuse faith with denial.
Wait a minute. Say that one more time.
Don't confuse faith with denial. Faith says, yeah, this is a crappy situation, but I'm gonna keep standing anyhow. Denial acts like it's not really, you know, it's all right. Name it, you know, and we got all kinds of ways of saying it. Somebody asks you, how you doing? I'm blessed. I'm too blessed to be stressed. There's no such thing as too blessed to be stressed. You know, the power of faith is that you can be stressed and still blessed. And you're going to have some stressful moments, and you're going to have some moments bordering on despair and depression and challenge. And you need to be honest about that, and you need to own it, and you need to invite people within a space that's safe. You can't share that with everybody.
That's right.
To support you through it. And so I don't like all these little cliches, too blessed to be stressed, no such thing. And that somehow you're not going to experience trauma or depression because you're a person of faith. You know, sometimes it's a matter, it's chemical. It may not be, you know, sometimes it's chemical and it needs to be treated. I believe in prayer, but sometimes you need treatment. I mean, if you got anything else wrong with another organ in your body, with your liver, your heart, you know, whatever it is, you recognize that there's something physiological, biological, chemical, and you treat it, and there's no stigma attached to it. But when it comes to the brain, we stigmatize mental health.
That's right.
And we forget that the brain is an organ. It makes sense that the brain might have a chemical imbalance, needs to be treated even while you pray and you talk to your pastor, and you know, God works alongside and through all of that. So we got to be here for one another. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk so long.
No, please. Wow, you said so much. I just want to thank you. And, you know, for those that don't know, I am a member of Ebenezer. Dr. Warnock is, excuse me, my spiritual leader and confidant. And when I was going through my suicidal ideation, I texted him that night, and he was the one that said, I'll pray with you, but you also got to go to the doctor. You got to get help. And so as we've been experiencing all of this trauma, for those of you that Hillary Dunston says, we internalize our feelings and keep it moving. It's very unhealthy. You know, you just talked about not being too blessed, you know, to be stressed. Dr. Spirit, well, Dr. Warnock said so much. How do you want to, you know, follow up and just talk about the importance and everything, again, that we're going through? Because, you know, of course, we're dealing with the trauma from what has happened, whether it's George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or, you know, on and on and on, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner. I mean, we could keep naming, and there's so many people that we haven't seen videos of. But let's also talk about the trauma we experience in the workplace. You know, I'm sure we have a lot of people on the phone that work in these corporate settings. And if I had $1 for every time I felt marginalized, you know, within the record industry, and Royce, we can talk about this, you know, they want our rhythm, but they don't want our blues. Everybody want a piece of the Black culture, right? But you don't want to, you know, give us the same thing that our white counterparts might be making, or you don't want to give us the same record deals that some of our pop artists are getting. Like, racial trauma is just staring us in the face so much. Why is it so important, Dr. Spirit and Dr. Simms, for us to confront this head on? And like Dr. Warnock said, get help if we need it.
Because if you don't get help, and if you don't figure out healthy ways to be able to process, and you don't come up with a great self-care regimen, you will crack under the pressure. And so I tell my clients all the time, you know, we have this saying in the Black community that Black don't crack. And I go, oh yes, it absolutely does, but from the inside out. And that's because we are trained and conditioned not to show weakness. We are trained and conditioned to look like we have it all together. We cannot ask for help. We need to be each other's help. Black women are dying under the weight of the Black Superwoman syndrome, which is a very real syndrome. We don't understand the way that that works. And as the good Reverend Doctor said, there comes a point where if you don't look at your brain as you would look at your lungs, as you would look at your heart, then over time it is going to get sick. And the best analogy that I can give you is, you know, you are in no way, shape, or form immune from getting ill, right? We have all gotten the flu. We have all gotten a cold. So if you're at work one day or at school one day and you recognize, oh, I'm getting the chills, or my nose is sniffling, my throat feels kind of scratchy, you might leave work that day or call off of work and go to the pharmacy and go grab some orange juice and, you know, some Mucinex or some, you know, whatever it is that you choose to grab. You go home, you take that medicine, you climb in the bed. If after 2 or 3 days you're feeling good, you get back up, you're back at it. But after 3 or 4 days, if you recognize that those symptoms are still there, what do? You say, well, if I'm not feeling any better, I'm gonna go ahead and go see the doctor. I'm gonna go ahead and see a professional to go see what's going on with me. Mental health is exactly the same way. If you are recognizing that you are having feelings that are unhealthy, but they are not going away, you need to go and let a professional take a look at you. And what we don't recognize, especially in the Black community, we don't recognize the way that mental health and mental illness works. We need to know that 50% of all mental illness develops before an individual is 14 years of age, Shanti. Before we're 14 years of age. And the onset from illness to the time that we actually get care is usually about 11 years. So that means people are walking around from their childhoods literally having mental health issues, and they've had it so long that they think it's their personalities. Their friends and families think it's their personalities. Oh, you've always been that way. You've always been shy, or you've always been a little anxious. That's not normal. That's not healthy.
But you add the trauma on top of that, right?
Come on, you add the trauma on top of that at every level. Exactly right. And what we have to recognize is, just because you are not responding to the stressors does not mean you are not experiencing it. Just because you are figuring out and your body is resilient enough to continue to deal with the compounded stressors of racism at every level, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's at school, whether it's on the bank line, whether it's on the job line, whether it's in any facet of your life. Oftentimes these stressors and these types of oppressions are pressing down and weighing down on you, and you don't even recognize it. It's institutionalized. You don't know all the time when the microaggressions are something more than that. You might feel these things at work, but you don't know what's at play. You don't know what your boss is really thinking about you. You don't know that the Navy captain was really racist until after he goes onto a Facebook rant, after he's been, retired for decades, and you don't know how many people's lives he's affected and impacted. We don't recognize all the ways that we are impacted by racism, but we have to know that it's real. And so we have to know that just by being a person of color, whether you're Black, Asian, Hispanic, I don't care what you are, recognizing that you are in a system that is set up to oppress you, that there is stress that is on you 100% of the time, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, and even the quality of that sleep in between. If you don't recognize that you are impacted by it and that you need mental health care in the same way you need any other type of care, then you are doing yourself and your community and your children and your partners and your parents and your family and any system you're a part of a huge disservice, because you are not operating at your best. You simply are not.
Yes,
Amen.
thank you. Let me just, before you jump in, Dr. Simms, I know Royce has another interview. I wanted to get your thoughts on therapy and just, any other closing thoughts that you have for us before you had to jump to your next interview.
Oh yeah. Well, therapy is definitely, it's helped me like tremendously, just functioning like on a day-to-day. I actually learned a lot about myself through therapy, because I started talking to somebody about just sobriety, just sobriety as an isolated thing. And then it started to like evolve, the conversation started to evolve. And then we started to talk about some of the things that I seen in my childhood with my dad and mom's relationship, and some of the things that I seen that I feel like they bothered me, but I didn't view them as I didn't identify with them as traumatic or anything like that. I got used to kind of suppressing feelings. So that was just kind of like my way of dealing with things.
And you probably became desensitized.
Yeah. So when I started to talk about them, I just went into the conversation and I started to break things down, and one thing led to another. I'm in tears. You know what I mean? So like that moment right there was the moment that I realized there were things affecting me more than what I knew, and that I wasn't able to get in touch with those things or identify them as what they really are. I became extremely good at suppressing and moving on, just placing it somewhere else, So once I started to delve into just identifying with some of those things, and I was able to draw a correlation between pretty much everything. I started learning that nothing about me is like by chance, and everything is for a reason. I just thought I liked drinking more than people, like I never had a moment where I could connect me drinking to anything, like suppressing any sort of feelings, or just, like drinking to escape anything or anything like that. I just figured maybe I was genetically predisposed to being alcoholic, I guess. You know what I mean? So once I was able to draw a correlation between all of these things and connect with them, I started being able to communicate a little bit better. Like I'm still not the best communicator. Like I still get on my wife's last nerve, but at least I feel like I'm to a point where I can speak, we can talk and we can talk with the intention of getting to a place. Mm-hmm. Up until before that, like if I'm speaking to you and we're talking or we're disagreeing or something, if you say the wrong thing, you take me to a place where I'm just now saying things that I think is gonna hurt your feelings. Like that's my way of communicating. I think that's like the rapper in me. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what I was kind of saying about the LGBTQ community. Like the rapper in me wants to be able to express myself in a way that's free. And that's therapeutic for me. Like to be able to express myself unapologetically. I'm inspired by like NWA, Tupac, very outspoken rappers. That's who I grew up looking up to. So like my first instinct is always to do that. And then like I never took into consideration how my words may make somebody feel until the world is in disarray. And now everybody's expressing their concerns with things. and then noticing the disconnect within our community, I just felt like they shouldn't feel like that. This is the one time where I feel like we should all feel like in this moment that we're being heard. Nobody should feel disconnected from that. So I just felt like that was interesting, that I could kind of like avoid that for so long. You know what I mean? And it just kind of grows you up a little bit. And then you see some artists who have a platform who don't want to identify their platform as like a platform. Like they have a say, you know, like I'm not a role model, you know what I mean? And that's like their pass to kind of like not have to speak on things. And them not knowing, being aware of how harmful that can be, at least just that way of thinking,
Right.
them not realizing that, it just speaks very, very loudly to me, you know what I mean? So and I think it's just coming to me in my older age, because I definitely used to be that person. And I just think ever since therapy, I just feel like I started actually developing. And I feel like if you're just drinking every day, you're not addressing feelings, then you're just missing out on a whole bunch of development. And it's just like, I don't know, the past 8 years, I just feel like I turned into an adult and I was like a kid prior to. So I just kind of look at therapy like an amenity. And it's an amenity that's not available to our community. And I just feel like anybody who's in any sort of position that can do something about it, we should place that amenity in our neighborhoods and make it available to our people as well.
Thank you so much. And it's there. It's just we got to do a better job of making sure people know that it's there. And we also have to do a better job of encouraging our younger people to want to become clinicians, to want to be, you know, a Dr. Spirit or a Dr. Simms, you know, and know the differences between what is a psychiatrist and what is a psychologist. So I thank you so much, Royce, for joining us this evening and for your voice. We appreciate you as always.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, too. You guys are brilliant. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Royce.
Thank you.
Thank
We have
you.
a question for Dr. Warnock. How do you all see the relationship between the African American and Latinx community as we fight together on these issues? As a Latino, I do see room for a lot of improvement concerning the connections between our groups. What kind of strategy should we implement in order to get closer together? That's a great question.
Well, I would welcome the other panelists to join me in responding to this, but I was thinking about this in relationship also to what Royce was saying. We are witnessing in this moment a great and I think transformational expression of power and passion and commitment on the streets of our country. Voices pushing for change, multiracial voices, Black and Latinx and white voices as well. And you know, part of what we need to recognize in this conversation about police reform, and I think more importantly, reforming the carceral system, is that we've got the police and the criminal justice system doing what we need mental health infrastructure to address. So, you know, Royce was asking about, well, if people got influence and power and something needs to be done about this. I mean, we have money that we should be investing in mental health. We're investing in policing. We're trying to police problems that can actually be solved. There are people in Black communities and in Latinx communities and in white communities for that matter, who are self-medicating. We've had this kind of misguided war on drugs. At least it was a war as long as the drug was crack and the bodies were Black in urban centers and brown bodies in urban centers across our country. But then when the drug became seen in rural areas, and as we were shifting then, and we saw white younger sisters and brothers dealing with the same struggle, all of a sudden, we recognized that this was a mental health issue. And I'm glad we got this new enlightenment over the last few years but it was a mental health issue for the folk we called crackheads in the 80s.
That's right.
And in the 90s, Black and brown sisters and brothers struggling with these issues in South Central LA and in Georgia for that matter. So what I'd like to see us do is take advantage of this opportunity, this moment, where we are seeing in Georgia and across our country, white sisters and brothers struggling with addiction and struggling with meth. I'd like to see us take advantage of this moment and build the kind of multiracial coalition that will move us from social control to social transformation, so that we don't try to police problems that need to be addressed and solved through a robust mental health care system.
Thank you. Dr. Simms, you want to add to that?
Take my nose on mute. So going back to that question about, the Latinx community and the Black community uniting, my advice around that would be, because underneath that question, we know that we have divisions within the Black community. There are divisions between sometimes the Latino and the Black community. There are all type of divisions that we can unpack. And I think sometimes we get caught up in some of those differences and fail to unite around issues. So if we remain focused on resolving issues and trying to come to some agreement on strategies that work towards resolving those issues, I think that's the best way to go in terms of communities kind of getting together and fighting issues together. I don't think we want to wait for the kind of that aha moment or that moment where we resolve all of our internal disputes, big or small as they may be. Let's not wait for that before we move forward and unite around issues. So as long as we keep focused on particular issues, I think there's strength in numbers. I think we can get together. We share some common issues, and I think that's the way to go. A couple of other things I want to just acknowledge Pastor Warnock for the way he spoke about mental illness. When I came to Atlanta 15 years ago, and I would see patients every day down at the Community Mental Health Center, they would say, "Dr. Simms, I don't have depression. I'm not claiming that." Or I would constantly hear, my pastor just says I need to pray more, or the other members of the congregation would say I need to pray more. And I have witnessed a lot of progression in that specific area. So I really want to applaud you for that. We've come a long way in a short period of time. Just in my small, short lifetime, I've seen a lot of progress in that area because our faith-based community is so important. So we really need that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. The other thing I want to acknowledge, Royce talked about the LGBTQ community. I went to a diversity training a couple years back, and one of the facilitators talked to the struggle with bringing her whole self into work. As a gay woman who had a child, and who was externally facing, was interacting with clients, she didn't feel comfortable talking about her same-sex relationship. She didn't feel comfortable talking about the child they just brought into their relationship. And so these aren't issues that were at the top of my mind. I was thinking, well, she is a lesbian woman. I'm not thinking there's these other issues underneath that. And so it helped me to understand the importance of bringing your whole self to work. Similarly, with this whole conversation and these issues around race, we need to acknowledge that we've largely been stifled and made out to be complainers or agitators or rebel rousers when issues of racism impact us at work. Many of us don't feel comfortable with those issues at work. And I found these recent events to be a little bit different.
And remember, it's from the Fuller Brush Company. So your satisfaction is 100%.
I'm sorry, Felder, can you please mute your phone? Thank you.
Yeah, I found for the first time that even corporations that typically avoid these issues all these CEOs are putting out statements. Leaders at different businesses are reaching out to Black folks and asking, how are you doing, and acknowledging racism and acknowledging that it may impact how you function at work. So I'm feeling like there's a real opportunity here, and I hope more and more comes of it. I hope we're able to talk about our experiences and to have those experiences acknowledged, and to get the proper support that we need at work. And so that's a big thing. And just the last thing, major issues: diabetes, obesity, asthma. Racism causes a great amount of stress. These are conditions that are connected to stress and structural racism. We touched on some of the social determinants, of health. So we have to understand the impact that these issues can have on our physical health. Once we understand that, hopefully we'll be in the position to make some different choices, some different decisions in terms about our nutrition, our spiritual practice, our stress reducing behaviors, our levels of physical activity. We need to start to make those connections more and more. And then beyond that, we need to push for those things that aren't totally in our control. Growing up in poverty, you have so many cards stacked against you. Someone touched on early on food deserts. These are things that at a community level, at a legislative level, that we can potentially push to have some changes. So just wanted to touch on all of those issues. I think it's been a great conversation. There's so much to unpack, but I just want to talk some of those things.
Thank you, Dr. Simms. We're coming up on we have about 10 minutes left. I want to go to Dr. Spirit next, and then I'm going to let each of you guys kind of leave us with some parting words around police reform and what we can do around racial trauma and protecting our mental health. But how can we protect our mental health in the workplace? Dr. Simms was just talking about a lot of it. Certainly there are a lot of microaggressions, that we deal with in the workplace, and we see the CEOs putting out the announcements. I've seen even like Ulta, where I go and shop for beauty, and they're highlighting, their African-American lines. And this is great. And I'm glad to see this, and I know part of it's business too, right? So they're seizing the moment and taking advantage of the opportunity, but that doesn't mean racism in the workplace is gonna go away. What are some tips or some strategies that we can do for those of us that are still physically going into the office, or even, doing Zoom meetings and still feel like we're being, marginalized, our voices aren't getting heard, we're being overlooked for the promotions, and how do we deal with that in the workplace?
Yeah, well, I want to say first and foremost that, be encouraged, because the time is right for these conversations. I have done several last week, and I have several that I'm doing this week as it relates to racism in the workplace, allyship, resiliency, all of these things. So in a lot of ways, we really are in an economic climate, and I will say economic first and foremost, because this is a capitalistic society. So as these corporations are starting to understand that if they don't speak out, if they don't look for ways to address racism, that will affect their overall productivity, that will affect their overall consumership, which ultimately then affects their economics, which is what they care about.
Right.
So, be encouraged that now the time is right for change. If you are a supervisor, if you are a manager, if you are an executive who is a person who has the ability to make change, Think about being the person that initiates diversity conversations in the workplace, hiring experts. I cannot stress enough the importance of bringing in mental health experts into these conversations. I don't care if you're as high up as the NFL or some of these major other corporations, or if you were just the everyday mom and pop who says, well, listen, I have a homogenous group of all white people, and I don't understand why I need to talk about diversity or racism in the workplace. This is a conversation that we all need to be talking about as Americans, because the real deal right now, which also ties into the other person who asked the question about the relationship between the Black community and the Latino community or the Latinx community, the way I see it right now is that either you are for racism and supremacy or you're everybody else. There's only two groups at this point, so you need to choose sides. And if you can't figure out which side, then you've already chosen in your complicity. So we need to be looking for ways that we can affect change. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our mental health and wellness. If you are an employee who says, I am not seeing a therapist, first and foremost, I want you to consider getting into some great therapy yourself. You can utilize your EAP benefits, which are employee assistance program benefits, which many companies that have more than 50 employees have. And so many employees don't even recognize that they could be seeing a therapist and their employer would be the individuals that would be taking care of the cost of that. Or you can utilize your health insurance benefits. So many women will go to their gynecologist, but will not go to their therapist. So many men will go get their, get their prostates checked, but will not go get their anxiety screeners done, right? So we need to be interacting and utilizing those mental health benefits. The other part of this is that you have to know who your allies are at work. You have to know who can speak up with you, who can align with you. When you have issues around microaggressions, when you have issues where you see that there are some damaging situations, either for yourself or for your coworkers, don't be afraid to stand up and stand in the gap. Know how you can exercise your rights. Understand what your power is. We all have the power to influence change. Now more than ever, people are listening. Now more than ever, people are sensitive about these conversations. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to affect change. And if you don't know how to, simply sometimes asking the question, people would be totally happy. If you say, I don't know what to do here, I just know that something is wrong. Trust me, folks would be totally happy to tell you, this is how we can make this better. This is how you can help me in this place and space. And we have to be real about these things because racism is real in all areas and places, including in the workplace.
Thank you. Amen. Amen. 5-minute mark and 2 minutes or less, Dr. Warnock. We know you are running for Senate. Today obviously was a big day in Georgia for people to get out there in the primaries, but come November, what would you like to see happen around police reform? I know, Ebenezer's been doing a lot of work around criminal justice reform. You guys have expunged so many records, right, for misdemeanors and different things for people in our community. So thank you for the work that Ebenezer has been doing. So what would you like to leave us with, Dr. Warnock?
So again, Shanti, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always to be a part of these conversations. Criminal justice reform are really dismantling this oversized prison industrial complex is one of the issues that I talk about a lot. And because it has such an impact on our community, the tentacles of this system are just throughout and we've been focused, on, and rightfully so, on the brutal murder of George Floyd in broad daylight. That is, as awful as it is a consequence of mass incarceration. And so I'm still not seeing enough conversation about mass incarceration. Police brutality is a consequence of mass incarceration. You build large, it's got to eat. And this system feeds, it consumes Black and brown bodies. So we've got to get focused on this issue, which is why our church has been doing bailouts as a way of trying to talk about and argue for bail reform. We've been doing expungements. Believe it or not, 1 in 3 Americans has a record. That number's hard even for me to believe. Not a criminal record, but an arrest record, some kind of record. Because just because you don't have a conviction doesn't mean you don't have a record. And we've been expunging criminal arrest records, people whose lives are on hold because somewhere, the fact that they got arrested is somewhere, you know, in somebody's database. I was talking to one of our, a brother earlier today, one of our members who years ago when he was in college had an arrest for marijuana possession. And all these years later, he can't get some things done that he's trying to get done, not because he has a conviction, but he's got an arrest that he hasn't been able to get out of the system. So this is the hard work that we've got to do. It's one of the things that I'll be focused on as a candidate for the United States Senate. I'm focused on this because it impacts so many other things, including voting rights. Even after folks have served their time, in too many instances, they don't have access to the ballot. Sometimes they do and they don't know it, like here in Georgia. When you finished everything, in most cases, you've gotten your franchise back, but people don't necessarily know it. So this is the work that we're committed to doing. If you want to learn more about my campaign, you can go to Warnock for Georgia, Warnock, F-O-R, Georgia, spelled all the way out, .com, and learn about my journey and the work that we're trying to do in this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Simms, any parting words, and how can people find Black psychiatrists? And then I'm going to circle back quickly because there are a lot of questions in the chat about finding Black therapists, Dr. Spirit.
Yeah, it's a real problem. As someone who works in the insurance industry, it can be challenging. I always tell people, check with your insurance. Sometimes those directories are not accurate. I see in the comments people mention Facebook. There was a group called Black Therapists Rock. I'm not sure if it's still active. You know, I led the Association of Black Psychiatrists here in Atlanta. There's a big group of us here. Psychological, a group of Black psychologists. It does take some effort. I found psychologytoday.com to be very helpful. Help is available. Mental health has not been prioritized. That is part of the reason that we, you know, it's a bit more difficult. The funding and the reimbursement is not where it should be. I also talk about our community mental health centers. I was the same doctor in my private office as I was when I was sitting in my office in the community mental health center for 10 years. Please do the same no matter what. There are a lot of good people in our community whose goal it is to help you. So I would just leave you with, if you need help, seek help, ask, and just know that there are folks like myself, Dr. Spirit, Pastor Warnock, Royce, Shanti, who are contributing in various ways to the same cause, which is really fighting racism, police brutality, structural racism. Find your way to help. And know that your help is appreciated. At the same time, take care of your physical and mental health. You can't take care of anybody else if you don't take care of yourself. So start to do those things today. Don't keep putting off those things that you know you should be doing to take care of your health.
That's right.
Start today, because you can't help us if you're not around. And if you're debilitated, many of us, we all probably know someone who's had a stroke or who's had a heart attack, and we know what happens once you kind of start down that path. So do your part to the extent you can to keep yourself out of that situation so you can continue to be a strong contributing member to the community.
Thank you. And I just want to add a few resources too. So this is a great book. It's called Mind Matters, a resource guide to psychiatry for Black communities. It was written by either 8 or 10 African-American psychiatrists, a few of them that I actually know. This is an incredible book, very informative. I'm reading it again, Mind Matters. It's available on Amazon. Also, thank you, AJ, who's our one of our facilitators. He mentioned the book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma, and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. Also, there is a meditation app that was created by an African-American. It's called Liberate. And the app was designed to support Black, Indigenous, people of color on their path to healing by naming and offering resources for common cultural experiences like internalized racism and microaggressions. I have heard wonderful things about this app. So it's called Liberate. Y'all go to your app store on your smartphone and look up Liberation Meditation. It should pop right up. But so grateful to this brother. Because some of us, you know, we want to meditate, but, you know, some of the apps are great, but this one specifically is coming from a cultural perspective. So definitely check it out. Visit our website, silencetheshame.com, under resources. Also, we have a lot of these Zooms that we've been doing over the past few months around, you know, mental health, postpartum depression. We did one with Dr. Joy and Dr. Spirit about managing relationships. This one will be up on our YouTube page. So go under Silence the Shame TV and check that out, or go on our website. But it's important for us to continue to hold these conversations. You know, Silence the Shame, we're proud to be at the forefront of, you know, this walk and this ministry around mental health, and especially now as everything is heightened around the racial trauma that we're experiencing. So make sure that you share this conversation when it's available. We're going to be doing more. I'm going to be calling on Dr. Warnock. We're going to be hitting the streets so we can get the message out about his campaign. You had 100 eager people on here tonight, Dr. Warnock, to hear your message. So we're going to get going and continue to do this powerful work. Dr. Spirit, how can we find you? How can we support your business and organization? We talked about therapyforblackgirls.com, but talk to us about your company and how people can find a therapist if they need it.
Well, I am always around. You can find me at Talk to Spirit at all of my social media. It's Talk the number 2 Spirit, just like you see here. I do free mental health chats on Friday on my Facebook page so that we can have live interaction about your mental health issues. Then there are tons of other organizations out there. My company is T2S Enterprises. We have 6 therapists. But we are more about making sure that everybody has quality access to mental health care. It does not have to be with me. I preach it all the time. Whether you're going to Therapy for Black Girls, whether you're looking at blackfemaletherapist.com, whether you're going to Psychology Today, whether you're going to the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation and looking at them, there are a million ways for you to get access to care. And so what I want to leave people with today is knowing, one, everybody needs therapy. Even therapists need therapy. Even your pastor needs therapy. Everybody needs therapy. And if you are not in therapy, especially right now with everything else that's going on, you are doing yourself a disservice. And you do not have to wait until we are done sheltering in place. There is a such thing called telemental health, which is therapy utilizing your devices. So the same way that you're watching us now, you could be meeting with a therapist from the comfort of your home or your car or your job, or while you're working or while you're exercising. Everybody needs therapy. And the other part of that is, do not ever let money be the reason why you are not in therapy. It broke my heart to hear Royce 5'9" say that therapy is like an amenity. And for a lot of people, it really is, because we have thought that it's something that we can't afford, or that only rich people can have, or it's just always seemed out of reach. I want you to know, whether it is pro bono services or sliding fee scale services, or insurance-based services, or self-pay services, or employee assistance programs, community mental health programs, grants, scholarships, there is always a way for you to get access to care. So do not let money be the thing that stops you, because really that is just your thought process stopping you. Okay, I think that it's so important for us to say that. And so I just want you to know that with everything that's going on, your body keeps the score. If you were walking around saying, I am absolutely fine, I know that I don't need anything, or worse, if you think, oh my goodness, I know that I need something, but I definitely do not want to open up that wound, because if I start crying, I will not be able to stop. For everybody out there that is hurting or that is disconnected from your feelings, I want you to know that I have never, and I mean never in my entire career, met a person who has gone to the hospital or has sat in a therapy chair who has never been able to stop crying. Okay. So I want you to know that it is 100% okay for you to deal with what you are dealing with. You are strong enough to be able to deal with it. You do not have to suppress it, repress it, be in denial, think that you got to have faith over fear. As I tell all of my Christian folks, even Jesus wept. You are not stronger than Jesus, okay? So at the end of the day, what we have to remember is that racism is real. It is constantly affecting us. It is not something that is just in your head. It is not something that you are just making up. It is absolutely in your head. It is absolutely in your body, and it is affecting you whether you choose to deal with it or not. Love yourself enough to deal with it. Do not set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, and know that you do not have to be in the fight all the time. This is a tag team. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You do not always have to be on the front lines. Take time to take care of you. Take a break, recharge, refill, refuel, and then get back out there, because we need you in the fight, but we need you physically and mentally healthy.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Spirit. And you can follow me on Instagram at ShantiDas404. Follow Silence the Shame at Silence the Shame on IG. On Facebook, we are at Silence TH Shame. We post a lot of helpful articles and information. You've been tuned into the effects of racial trauma on mental health in the Black community. Remember what Dr. Warnock said, we are not too blessed to be stressed.
Come on.
We all have a lot going on. We didn't even get on grief tonight, but you add the grief. We're grieving, right? The loss of loved ones. We're dealing with the loss of connectivity, and we're dealing with the loss of love in the Black community from all the racial trauma that we've experienced. So let's continue to have these authentic conversations. Let's love one another. Let's support our non-Black communities that are fighting the good fight, that are on the front lines with us out there protesting. Let's take our anger to the polls. I hope y'all voted today. For those of y'all that didn't, you need to say shame on you to your friends and your family members, and we got to get them to the polls in November so we can usher in some new leadership, so we can do more around prison reform, so we can do more around racial trauma. But we've got to keep fighting the good fight. Thank you again to Dr. Spirit. Thank you to Dr. Simms. Thank you to Dr. Warnock, my brother from another mother. I love you, sir. Thank you for your leadership. Y'all take care of yourselves. Continue to silence the shame around racism and mental health. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.